Hello, hello. Evan,
Darren, welcome to the party.
thanks, man, dude. It's so good to see you and very excited to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited. How's life? How's life on your end?
Dude, we're doing great. Everything is going well. It's a lovely day here in Los Angeles, and it's awesome to
Hey,
hear that there's so many people tuned in from around the world. So, good afternoon, good morning, good night. It's an honor to be here with you. Thank you so much for spending your day with
the
Motion and all of us. The presentations have been incredible.
the community's strong, and everybody. If you don't know Darren, Darren is someone that I deeply respects. Like when he speaks, I have to listen. That's just kind of how it goes. He's a self-proclaimed analog boy in a digital world. He's been a bartender, a journalist, and a digital content producer. Now he's the VP of social media at Wpromote, where he helps shape teams, paid social strategies, and the way we really share our experiences online. So everybody, get into the chat. Let's show him some love. Make it happen. Make it happen. Darren, welcome to the party.
Heck yes, happy to be here. Yeah, I know we're going to kick off with some polls. And the first one was actually just who's in attendance today from a, you know, job title standpoint. So that was a poll that you guys had. And I think it's really interesting to see the role breakdown because we're covering a lot of ground here, right? From finance to strategy to media buying. So there's a lot of really interesting cross pollination of disciplines here. So it's really cool to see how many diverse roles we have in the house. But there's a couple more polls we want to kind of kick off with and lead in with just to set the tone.
Yeah. So the second one that we want to get to here is how would you describe the current state of your organization's creative process? You have three options there. Again, this is an open and honest space. We're all here to be better. So let's fill it out with as much honesty as we can, everybody.
Yeah. So we'll see in real time. Folks are feeling really confident. A lot of people stressing now. It's Q4 right now, too. So there's definitely a mounting feeling of stress with getting what we need in the account. And then, yeah, fair percentage here, 21% are feeling like they really need some help. So that's awesome. You guys are being vulnerable with the poll and just, we're here to help. And I think there's been a ton of actionable insight, and we're going to try to bring that in this session too. Next quick poll, just to set the stage here, is our creative test and learn methodology moves our business forward. We're keeping this one very simple. True or false? You guys feel like at base level, how you are incorporating testing frameworks into your business practice is moving your business forward. You're finding growth. You're finding scale. Awesome. Really happy to see a strong percentage here of confidence that people feel the business is moving forward. Oh, the percentages are shifting here a little bit. So I love these polls in real time. I kind of love seeing, the jockeying and the racing between the two responses. But yeah, we're here to help. So my goal today with this presentation is to zoom it out, really think about the psychology, how we view frameworks within the context of business and decision making, and then zoom it back down into actionable insights and frameworks for you guys to implement within your practice. So
Darren,
that's what we want to accomplish.
you're going to crush it. I'm going to step out. I'll step back in later on. But again, I'm super excited for everyone to be able to learn from what you're going to chat through.
Heck yeah, let's get it to it. Awesome, y'all. So thank you so much, Evan. Again, it's an honor to be here with everybody today. We're going to swing big today. And in the spirit of swinging big, I got a bunch of pictures of big swings. So that's going to be a fun aspect of the day too. But really, we've talked about it a lot today. It's really nice how the content's building. You can't iterate your way to advertising greatness. There is a point at time which you must make definitive, sometimes risky decisions with how we show up with our creative and how that creative ladders into our strategy. So what's on deck today? As Evan said, I'm a journalist at heart. That's how I started my career. So we're not going to bury the lead. We're going to talk about the main takeaways. I want to present some foundations and thought starters. So just some simple frameworks from a more macro down to a more micro level. We're then going to have a fireside. We're going to bring Evan back and going to unpack some of those concepts in a live discussion. And then there's an appendix that I'm going to leave you all with some resources on creative testing methodologies, frameworks for media buying and account structure. So hopefully a lot of good leave behinds that y'all can value and bring into your practice day in and day out. So first things first, main takeaways. Old is new again, and simplicity always wins. If it's overly complicated, it's probably not going to work. So we really want to distill down to some basics here, zoom out to zoom in, and favor simplicity in what we do. Next thing is creative is the new audience magnet. Your inroad to both reach and greater scale, it now starts with creative. That is, a very definitive piece of the puzzle these days. And also, the word magnet is used very intentionally here. The concepts of targeting and conquesting, the language of marketing in a lot of ways to me is very brutal, and it doesn't position customers and brands in alignment with one another in a thoughtful way. It's very dominating. So we want to think about building magnets, building inroads, being a guide. And I think it starts with the language that we use and how we talk about our customers and how we work. Next thing is iterative frameworks are less effective in the current landscape. Concept frameworks that prioritize differentiation drive outcomes. That is the most practical and ground level takeaway for today. And we're going to unpack that at length. Awesome. So let's move to our foundations and thought starters. First and foremost, and this is for everyone, right? Myself included, reflection is always important. The world is changing. Are you? Is your business? Is the way you're showing up within the context of your business evolving to keep pace with how the world is evolving? So with that in mind, we look at ad delivery and auctions as a baseline. We look at things like PMAX, ASC, which is becoming a far more adopted form of media buying within Meta. These things are changing rapidly and really flattening the levers that media buyers have. So creative becomes the centerpiece. It becomes the unlock. Are you, though, fighting the current, or are you rolling with it to adopt and change and roll with the moment? Next thing is the media landscape is really collapsing. It's consolidating. It's cross-pollinating. In just a minute, there's going to be some headlines on the screen that double down on that. But the last thing is generative AI. Have you heard of it? Just kidding on that front. It's obviously the buzzword of the year, but it's really, really critical, not only how we can complement workflows with generative AI, but where it's actually showing up in the systems like in PMAX or ASC. But with that in mind, right, the landscape is becoming very weird right now. So it's really important to understand the context of the moment. Taylor talked about that earlier, how the context really matters for how effectiveness prevails. But Google is suggesting that Instagram and TikTok are eating into its search share. They're open about that. We're also seeing that TikTok is experimenting with search ads. So there's cross-pollination in media buying skill sets that are coming into focus. X now has ad inventory available via programmatic. So we're seeing like a collapse into a supply side, demand side. And then last but not least, Bing and Microsoft now have ad inventory available in Snap's My AI. These worlds of programmatic, search, social, the lines are really blurring and the systems are becoming, again, more automated and more AI driven. So it's really important that we understand that in context of how we make decisions and build frameworks for scale. Next thing is, whoa, we have freaking Rocketeer showing up early here. That's okay. The best ad for one is the best ad for all. This is a quote from an article that I'm going to share the link for with y'all today. I think it's required reading. But the reality is humans, we do not change as fast as technology does. Generally speaking, the tenets of great marketing and advertising have been the same for the last century or so. It is really, really critical to understand that the mediums are just different. In this required reading, the name of the essay is Anti-Personalization. The best ad for one is the best ad for all. This was a transformative article for me to really, reflect and examine my position. Am I keeping up? Am I examining how we're working? And it's really laid the groundwork for how I think about our team structure, our focus going forward. But at the end of the day, marketing and technology have become very conflated. Obviously, technology really helps how we approach marketing, but the ability to try to talk to people, especially in paid social media, one-to-one. In other words, to segment our audiences to a degree where we're trying to tailor every single message to them is a road into darkness. Right now, the best ad for one is the best ad for all. And your goal as brand marketers, performance marketers, entrepreneurs, and teams should be to build frameworks that allow you to systematically test highly differentiated concepts to the broadest possible audience within, your constraints, right? There's going to be budget, there's going to be where you are in your maturity journey to identify what has the highest propensity to scale. That is what has the most impact over the longest time horizon with the most number of people from a creative standpoint, from a strategic standpoint. That is our goal. And the examples on the screen here, right? Just some old ads, but effective. We have Rocketeer on some Beeman's bubblegum. We could call this maybe one of the first influencer ads ever, right? Or an ad with a brand partnership. This is a comic book character who is positioned in an ad in a way to sell gum. Heinz, an iconic brand. The creative is beautiful. The way the bottle is like, you know, dispensing ketchup onto each different food product, showing the diversity of how the product can be used to solve your needs in your household. Up, and then the bottle's gone. Got to reload. These are great ads that tap into the foundational human way that we receive advertising messaging. It's about emotion first. It's about problems and solutions. Those tenets remain so true, and those tenets are broad. Those are messages that can be delivered to the masses and resonate. That should be our goal in the current landscape. So let's look at this in practice, okay? Vuori, incredible brand, an incredible brand to, I think, model decision-making after, and a great brand to do research with. In their ads library, and I will disclose that this is one of our clients, so we work very closely with them. But this ad on the left has been running since March 15th of this year. In a calendar year, Vuori will test roughly 1,500 to 2,000 pieces of creative. There is a high velocity engine. This ad is an ad as simple as it seems that keeps giving. It has the highest propensity to scale within the frameworks of how we design the test. It's a simple flat lay that showcases the color palette, and it has a very succinct tagline, one short for every sport. The beauty here about how this framework evolves is when you want to move media to even more mass reach. So when we look at the next example, which is a television ad for Vuori, the opening shot brings in the concept. There is a high level of confidence because we know this ad, which is still live and has been live for most of the year, has consistently scaled and taken on more and more spend. This is an ad that we can trust has mass appeal. When we then want to build a more premier asset to reach what we call pure brand awareness television, we can bring those concepts forward with a high level of confidence that the best ad for one is the best ad for all. And we are putting a relevant message in front of the widest audience possible. It's a really beautiful framework because it allows for expansion and scale throughout the funnel. Creative is the new magnet. We talked about this at the intro, but I would love to visualize it and contextualize it to the current landscape. So we're zooming in now. Overindulgent segmentation now limits Meta's auction. That is a fact. And this will eventually be the case for all Snap, TikTok, as all of these systems move to be more automated in their ad delivery. So let's look at the old way and look at the new way. When we think about the old way of doing creative strategy and media buying, right, side by side, it was very segmented, persona-based. The idea here is you're drawing these circles, right, that are representative of audiences, people we want to reach. Then you're building ads to pair with those audience. The problem is people are dynamic. We change, we shift, we move in and out of life events and needs and wants and desires and income strata. So the variables are constantly moving, but the circles are rigid. And therefore, there's a very real disconnect there. And that disconnect shows up in the metrics, right? Diminishing returns, creative fatigue. And now we're spinning and spiraling. In these new systems, the new way, broad audience is powerful. What we can now do is create a framework for building creative that is concept driven, that goes and meets people where they are. And those people are moving through these permeable circles, and the auction is able to find and match the right creative with the right person at the right time. And now maybe the OG media buyers in the room are going to have contention with that statement. But again, we must examine, are we changing? Are we keeping up with the times? Are we stuck in old ways? We've rigorously tested this model at Wpromote. This model is prevailing 80 to 85% of the time, where we are seeing mass scale accessible through a broad audience approach with creative concept differentiation and allowing that auction, that machine learning algorithm to do what it does and match that creative with our core audiences. And this is a beautiful framework because it puts that power back in creative's hands. Creative is the magnet. This is how you unlock reach and scale in the current landscape. So now we go down a layer further. Big swings, big learnings, little swings, little learnings. And I'm going to put, in other words, iterative testing, what we refer to as making minor changes to existing assets or designing a testing roadmap, because iteration can happen right on the landing page. It can happen in copy. It can happen in email. There's iteration that shows up all across marketing. But when you are doing minor changes to existing assets or designing a roadmap that prioritizes the small, over time, it will limit both performance and your learnings for what works. That is going to be your slow profitable death, or that diminishing return curve accelerating. So we got to take bigger swings. Let's look at some examples, right? This is a fine test. This is a test that we ran at Wpromote. This was for a client called Purple Carrot. This is what I would call an iterative test. We have two similar base asset concepts. We have different value propositions or emotional response cues with the text overlay. This is a really, really fine test for how we derive meaning. However, this is a better test. This is a better test because what it does is it positions two wildly diverse themes, one that is very animation driven, and these are both videos in practice. These are just screen grabs from the video, but this very animated driven concept against this more lifestyle concept. We learned so much more from test B in this instance, and we're able to scale and think about how we reach new customers and grow their business with this mindset. So when we think about how we bring this into our day-to-day, we must look at asset differentiation and setting up the framework to achieve that. So let's look at this in a very real kind of data-driven sense. This is a report that you can request from Meta. If you're working with Meta, which I'm sure everyone here is media buying on Meta, if you're an agency with a partner manager, or you're a brand that has assigned support at Meta, ask for a creative differentiation report. What this will do is it will show you how Meta's auction is actually perceiving your creative. This is one of our clients where you can see on the left, the creative has differentiation. The similarity score is 45%. As we move across, you'll see what we think of as iterative ad design. These are very different creatives, but the thing is the auction is viewing them as similar. We can see that in the similarity score, 82% in the center example and 86% on the far right example. What this means is to the auction, if it perceives that one ad in the middle or right column has no propensity to scale, in the total value equation, there isn't user value being derived in this ad, the costs are going to start rising, and the other version of the ad is being ostensibly rendered as the exact same. So it's going to guess or assume that that ad will have similar, resonance within the total value equation, and that ad will have limitation when it comes to scale. You will need to spend more to get that ad in front of more people because that equation will not be working in your favor. So there are some leave behinds here at the bottom of the slide. Factors that matter for differentiation in the auction and factors that don't. The image hash, the video thumbnail, these are factors that matter a lot for how Meta is perceiving differentiation within the creative. Things that don't matter so much, text overlays, copy. While important from a learning standpoint, right? We don't want to just throw that out with the bathwater. There is a D value for same asset with two different taglines over top of it, right? That would be considered like an iterative test, or a test maybe that was viable a year, 2 years ago. In the current auction landscape, that kind of test lacks value, and it is better to move to a more thematic, concept-driven testing structure. All right, so let's distill creative strategy here. So now we're getting down to like the job. How can we bring this to life in practice? Where do we start? First and foremost, you should weight your testing roadmap on concept tests, not iterative tests. That's just a baseline takeaway. Next up, some concept examples. Where do I start? Unboxing, us versus them, testimonial, unique value props, founder stories, lo-fi, ugly ads. These are all portals to concepts. You can riff and play within these concept sort of playgrounds and give yourself a nice runway to get some differentiation flowing into your account. Next thing is talent and building the framework, the systems, and the people who are going to be executing this within the organizations. So from a job description standpoint, this is how we operate at Wpromote with respect to laddering into this framework. The first pillar is going to be trend research and analysis. This is going to be what's happening on the platforms. What is audience behavior looking like? What's trending and what's hot within different demographics or groups or genres. That's going to be the language of how we show up and how we format and build our creative. Second pillar is going to be data. So how are we actually looking at the creative in market, the data and KPIs flowing from that creative, and using that to inform how we're going to play our next card, build our next big swing. And obviously use motion to do this. We use motion to do this. We've been using motion for years to do this. It is an incredible tool for visualizing and pairing performance data with the creative asset and deriving incredible insights. So yes, use motion. Lastly is going to be sentiment analysis. This is a really, really important piece of the puzzle with respect to understanding what customer needs are, right? Getting that feedback loop going. Are we actually solving customer problems and listening as a brand? Or are we just pushing what we believe our customers want to hear from us? It's really important that we do social listening. It's really important that we comb Reddit, comb Amazon, comb any review source to understand how conversations around our product or service are happening, so we can then bring those immediate feedback points into our creative strategy roadmap. If you are looking to build a job description or a role within your organization for this type of work, I would start with this list as the core functions of that role. And with that, we will bring Evan back into the mix for our fireside. This is Evan and I sitting next to a nice warm bonfire to unpack some of the role concepts and discussions up to this point, and super excited to jump into some Q&A and answer questions from the room. So Evan, come on back in, bro.
Darren, so eloquently said. I love all the different areas that you were able to touch. Everybody, if you do have any questions that pop up, throw them into that Q&A tab and start upvoting, so we're able to get to a spot where we just like start throwing those ones online. But Darren, like your presentation just got me thinking about a whole ton, right? So I think like one of the first places I wanted to start was just related to the audience magnet piece more than anything. So definitely want to know the story there more, and then like tying in some of the machine learning pieces as well, as it would make sense.
Yeah. So I mean, really, the audience magnet thing, it's like, I was at a conference once and I was listening to a speaker talk about marketing and what they do. And it was just, it sounded so brutal. It was so ugly. It was like conquesting and like, we want to make sure that our targets and we're maximizing like every little dollar from every person. It sounded so adversarial. And at the end of the day, like marketing is a very human, it's a very human practice. We are, you know, customers in the space as well. And I don't want to be thought of as a target or as an acquisition or as a conquest. And so I think for us as the practitioners of the space, right, there's a lot of mistrust out there with privacy and how algorithms and auctions and things work. There's a lot of mystification. And if that mystification is paired with a very brutal language, that does not set up a system of trust. And therefore, I think it's our responsibility as marketers to change the language and be, you know, influential where we can around how we form these conversations. So that was like a takeaway for me from that conference, which was not the point of the presentation. But I thought it was resonant. And so I've tried to build that into like how I present these concepts today.
Yes. I think like we're the leaders of our everydays. So whether it be like at a micro level when we're in the accounts and how we think about like, are we trying to get a sale, or is it like we are trying to introduce people to something that's actually beneficial for them? Like there's just language.
Yeah, absolutely. And welcome people. It's a community, just like this community is so vibrant and welcoming. Our brands, how we work is a function of community. So that language should reflect that.
Fantastic. Okay, so I did want to start switching gears a little bit more into the like the practical and making that come to life. So one of the things everyone tends to agree with, I saw the chat going crazy. It's like, yep, broad targeting all the way. Let the audience do their thing. But there's also like this mistrust, maybe, of like the machine learning side of things. So I'm wondering if I can get your take on it and how you view the world.
Yeah, man. I think there's always going to be a healthy skepticism, especially with people who have been in the media buying space for a long time, right? We saw it with even something like CBO, right? The campaign budget optimization, when that rolled out with Meta. Like, why would I let Meta take my job and do it better? Why would I let it place budget at the ad set level? Like, that is a function of optimization. The reality is, you know, it's not about replacement. It's about elevating our skill sets. And so when you look at like the history of even like computation, like at a certain point, the human beat the chess computer, but then the chess computer beat the human and like we never looked back. So like eventually the systems, the power of computers and these machine learning based AI based systems, it will get to a point where it can just make better decisions faster than a human can. And so I think coming to terms with that is really important as practitioners, and then taking that delta of time and applying it to really high value work. And in this instance, that high value work is creative. It centers creative as the most high value thing you can be applying your effort to. And that is a really, really important layer. And now, this is not to like discredit the media buyers, right? Like, I come from a media buying background. I think for media buyers, it's about how you interface with creative, how you like make that handshake really come to life, and think through again, there's always going to be account structure needs. There's always going to be understanding the business dynamics, these auction dynamics, the more technical sides of media buying. But when you can really level up your craft and creative, and then help share that with the creative strategists and the creative practitioners, the designers and editors, I think that's a far more high impact organization. And so that's what we want to aspire to adopt, is understand where the kind of puck is moving, let these systems, learn and continue to improve, but keep feeding it better inputs so that the outputs become better over time.
That's so interesting, because like I think we all inherently get it. It just becomes like when rubber meets the road, how do we make it come to life? One of the things I've heard you talk about, let me know if it's true. There's just like a combination when it comes to like trusting the beast versus manual intervention, and like that can
Yeah.
whittle down to like account structure even. So I'm thinking specifically like creative testing versus scale. So
Yep.
on your end, like how does that come to life in Wpromote's world when you're thinking about like when do we truly intervene versus go like hands off the keyboard? Because nothing's
Yeah.
really binary.
100%. I'm actually going to represent, and I have an appendix slide for this that I'm happy to kind of like use to ground the conversation.
Awesome.
All right. So when we think about a testing framework, right? First and foremost, we would apply what we'll call like a barbell strategy. It's a stock kind of trading term, but it basically means that, and you can like record labels do this too, right? Like record labels will fund the albums for 100 artists. Roughly only like 5 to 10 of those artists are ever going to pop and break through. So the idea here is like a majority of your budget should be parked in some sort of like consistent, we're able to like really count on the delivery here. But then we should have a healthy part of that budget, right? 10 to 20% realistically, that is going to be helping us fail forward and find that next explosive big swing. That is a function of the testing roadmap. So when we look at this framework from left to right, what we want to do is distill the environmental inputs, right? This is what are our like leading indicator KPIs, click-through rates, conversion rates. What is the competitive landscape looking like? What's happening and popping out there in the world? What are the trends and sentiments? Everything I talked through in that job description. And then what's our goal, right, with the business? Is success being measured? Then we ladder all that into creative. We now have a sandbox or a testing environment. So this is going to be where you allocate 10 to 20% of your total budget. The idea here is the magic happens at the ad set level, which is really represented in this area here. These are our concepts. These are our big swings visualized. You want to run these for 10 to 14 days so you can accrue what we'll call statistically significant data. That's going to be different for every brand depending on your scale. It might be longer, it might be shorter. We like to look in Google Analytics to basically land on what that timeline should be, path to conversion or time lag report, so we can see like how long does it usually take a customer from first exposure to purchase. That's going to be a good indicator for how we back into a testing sort of, testing timeline. And then from there, we're finding the winners. We are scaling those in the testing environment while replicating them in our business as usual campaigns. So there is another layer here that we're not directly addressing that is in play. That is business as usual. That is ASC. We do not use necessarily ASC as testing environment campaigns. We want to put the best of the best proven creative in those campaigns so they have just everything in there is a winner, and we know it's a winner. Simultaneously, we're scaling these and keeping them funded in our sandbox so that we have a parallel scale or a horizontal scale happening. You don't want to shut something off in one area because it might not replicate exactly the same in the other. So the goal here is to always be moving the ship forward. And this is a really reliable framework for how we've done that successfully over and over again.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, it's that mix between like giving the beast all of the power versus where to take it back in certain scenarios. Because again, like nothing
Exactly.
is like completely one or zero to one or the other. Like there's a lot of nuance in between when we're telling these stories, and
Yeah,
I
I
think
just
that
put in the
really.
chat through ASC. So ASC, Vincent, is an automated shopping campaigns within, or the Advantage Plus shopping campaigns rather, within Meta. It's a new ad campaign type that they rolled out this time last year, right before holiday, and it really is like a fully automated ad campaign. You literally, it's all broad targeting. You feed it your creative. You can set some parameters. They've just introduced geo. You can bid up or bid down on new versus returning customers. So there's some controls, but generally, right, it's a quote unquote black box. Like, and this is why I think there's skepticism and mistrust is like, oh my God, like you don't tell it anything. There's no targeting parameters, interest this, you just give it creative and let it go. And it's like, yeah, that's what you do.
Okay, Darren, there's a ton of questions starting to roll in. I do want to hit you with a couple others that are kind of top of mind for me because
Yeah, let's go.
in the same vein of like nothing's really zero to one all the time. We've talked a ton about big swings, and I think we all acknowledge that that's where the true scale is going to come from in unlocking new winners. But then the other side are still the iterations, those smaller changes. I'm wondering if this exists in your world, but is there a like a ratio or a percentage breakdown of how much of your time and spend will go to those big swings versus iterations?
Yeah, so it's definitely a great sort of like nuanced point of this entire conversation. We never want to throw like the baby out with the bathwater or spite our nose or cut off our nose to spite our face, right? Like iteration still has a place. I think what we see often, and we audit a lot of ad accounts, we get to poke under the hood of a lot of what brands are doing. And what we tend to see is a testing roadmap that just looks like small tweaks, small tweaks, small tweaks. And it's a lot of the same. For us, right, it's got to start with a big, definitive broad stroke. You've got to say, like, we're going to introduce something totally net new into the system that maybe we've never done before or that generally has a different look and feel. That is what's going to open up a new lane for you. That's where you're going to get a really, like, you call it drinking from the fire hose. You're going to get a huge influx of new data about your customers, about preference, about resonance of a message or a tone of the asset itself. From that point, there is a space for iteration. There is a space to go. Like, for example, the Vuori thing that I showed, that flat lay of those shorts, they did no less than 50 versions of that. So there is iteration happening. But once you land on a concept to unlock a lane, I would limit the amount of iteration till you find that point of scale. And then I would move on to a new concept to try to open up a new lane. That should be the goal and that should be the balance. Is there a formula for investment in these things? I think that varies based on brand and how your goals are measured, right? Like certain brands, it's KPIs are like customer acquisition. Others are going to be ROAS. So there's going to be scale versus efficiency sort of tensions. I think all the sessions throughout today have really unpacked those, especially the last one, in very awesome detail. So I think that's where you kind of start bringing all these conversations together within your organization. But yeah, there is a place for both. I think the hesitancy to take the big swings, though, is what needs to be overcome. Those are going to be your unlocks. Those are going to be your force multipliers. That's where we should really be putting our focused effort to build and get uncomfortable with some of that risk that comes with, or get comfortable with the risk rather.
Always got to get comfortable and get out of our comfort zones at the same time. So making sure we're doing it at the same
Yes.
time. Darren, I love that you're able to talk about like the high level concepts in theory so well, but also marry it with the way that we actually can implement in our day to days. I think like the last question that I have before we jump to the Q&A is I want to go back to the high level piece. So we've
Yeah.
talked about this a couple times throughout the day, but I'm very curious about your specific perspective. It's related to that brand and performance conversation. So not only do you have to deal with it like internally at the agency, it's also on the client end and managing that conversation. So I'm
Yep.
just curious about like your experience and your thoughts on that relationship between brand and performance or brand and growth.
Yeah. I think it's one of the most tragic realities that we all share that somehow along the way, brand marketing, performance marketing got bifurcated and are treated as two separate entities. And oftentimes within organizations, they'll sit in two separate teams. There will literally be a not a figurative silo, a literal silo that happens between these two things. And the reality is that performance is brand and brand is performance. Brand formance, performance branding. Like if your brand, and we'll define that as what we'll call actual awareness, pure top of funnel when we think about, exposure in mass media formats. If that isn't influencing or driving performance to a degree, and simultaneously, if your performance marketing is not in service of brand awareness, like helping people connect with your brand and remember your brand, then there is a broken system in play there. So the fact of the matter is we want to marry these two concepts. We want to bring them closer together, and we want to help them influence each other in a very symbiotic flywheel. Collapsing the funnel is a term that gets thrown around in the marketing space. What that means for me is, how do we bring the awareness point and the decision point as close together as possible? How can we, with our thoughtfulness and how we welcome people into our brand, make them a believer and get them excited so that they take that action that we want them to take as quickly as possible? I think when you bring these two disciplines together and start that conversation in a very thoughtful way to break the silo down, those goals are highly achievable. That end result is highly achievable. But it's unfortunate that the systems and the organizations that many of us work in or interface with are set up in a way that those two things are separate.
So interesting.
And
I
it's
appreciate
tricked
it.
us all. It's made us all like, oh my God, like the brand team, they don't get held to like ROAS. We're stuck in this dungeon. They get to do all these like splashy, flashy things. And like there's an animosity that can occur in some places between this. It's like, dude, run to whatever floor, send that Slack message like, hey, brand marketing, friend, I want to understand how we work together better. Like if it exists in your org, like break the silo down and go make some friends.
It's so important from a cultural perspective. You're right. You're right.
Yes.
That's how it's going to be outputted. Sweet, Darren. Let's rock and roll with some of these questions that are starting to come in here. And then the
Yeah.
first one that's the most upvoted right now is from Gabriel. Gabe's been asking really good questions throughout, by the way. So let's see what we got here. How do you know when it's time to test iterations of a winning ad in hopes to bring life back into it versus when it's time to test the next winning concept and move on?
Yeah. So it's a really good question, right? Like in terms of iteration versus concept, I think there's going to be natural inflection points within every business where you can kind of center these moments around. So we all operate within a calendar year, and that marketing calendar might look different for everyone, but there's typically going to be the cultural moments that matter. So things like holiday, right? There's going to be things that happen in the world around us, like the Deion Sanders blender. That's an opportunity to capitalize on. I know Taylor brought that up earlier. It's a great example. But also there's going to be things that we can control, or we can promos, new product releases. I think when you think about those moments within your business, that's where you really want to center your big swings. That's where you really want to put a lot of focus and effort into taking those risks, having a roadmap to test into those risks. And then from there, there's going to be an iterative life cycle flowing from it. So how can we maybe maximize the effort from the investment on taking those big swings by doing 1 to 2 rounds of iteration after that? That would be a good balance because it gives you like a nice time bound framework to operate within. But there's also, right, like never get stuck in like a sunk cost fallacy. So if something is literally not working, it is okay to abandon it. It's better to abandon it faster and move on than to get stuck in a sunk cost fallacy. So I will just like note that sunk cost fallacy it's a slippery slope, and we're all susceptible to it because you just want to hold on hope and belief. But at a certain point, logic must prevail.
100%. And then on top of Gabriel's question, Gabe has a question that actually I think lends itself nicely, more of the agency lens that we're applying here now. So
Yeah.
how do you suggest striking a balance between being safer and taking those big swings with clients who are in a situation where they have less budget allocated to their creative testing?
Yeah. So this is where I think the concept framework is actually super valuable. Somewhere along the way, it became, I think, creative and expensive became synonymous. And the truth is that doesn't need to be the case. You can produce a lot of very high value, potent creative on a shoestring budget with your cell phone and an imagination. like you can get out there and do some incredible things. One thing that we see work incredibly well are like UX screen recording flows, right? If you've never experimented with that type of like, what does it look like to shop on our website? What does it look like to use our software? Fire up your phone or your computer, do a screen recording of the 3 highest impact workflows, or just showing people how frictionless your experience is, and then use that as your ad. That is literally free 99. It takes 10 minutes to do, and that is a whole test in and of itself. So budget constraints, right? What is the phrase? Something is the motherhood of invention. I forget the first part of that, but anyways, y'all get what I'm saying. It's like constraints are a good thing. In fact, you should put self-inflicted constraints at times on your organization. If you have $10,000 to spend, how do we get some awesome stuff by only spending 2? I promise you the best work will happen when you bring those kind of constraint mindsets to your workflows and see the magic that flows from it.
That's so good. That is so. I literally shoot stuff on my phone and throw it into CapCut for free 99, and then have some stuff and throw it into the world.
Dude, yeah, and like that's the whole spirit, right? Is like fail fast, move fast, do it inexpensively, and then understand what works. Because as the volume increases, you're gonna have learning. That's the whole goal of testing, is to learn. When you're ready to make that big investment, here's something that sucks that we see happen all the time. Somebody goes and spends millions of dollars on a TV spot. They do all this planning and production. It's so expensive. And by the time the social team gets some assets, it's recut and parsed down, and it doesn't work. Why isn't it working? We invested so much money up front in this. Well, you didn't incorporate relevant feedback from a mass market into maybe how you built that like hero asset. A smarter way to do it would be to take some big swings at the bottom, find the framework that works well, like akin to the Vuori example, and then bring those elements into the big budget thing. So you have a high confidence that, again, the best ad for one is the best ad for all. We know that we've shown this ad to millions of people potentially in our meta ad account. We know that it's got sustenance and it has stability and scale. We know that this is a really strong message to take to the mass media. That is a highly confident system to operate within.
So good. Okay, so there is a question that popped up from Matthew's end that's actually diving deeper into concepts. I'm going to tackle a little bit on myself too.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's
Evan,
asking if you can.
you lead it off. I want to hear what you say about it before I talk.
I don't even know. I don't even want to do that. I'm still curious to hear what you say. I'm just like more thinking like in terms of this question, he's asking about like elaborating on concept testing frameworks. So it's like, what does that mean in your case? And the piece that I want to tack on is like, once we understand what it means in your world, how do you prioritize typically? Because there can be a million different concepts you test. How do you know where you want to start? So that's the piece that I want to add on.
Yeah. So the way that I would define a concept is the style of creative for which you are producing. So it's really about some combination of like aesthetic, the storytelling mode or vehicle, right? So in the one slide, which actually I can click back to just to
Let's do it.
just to ground this, because things like unboxing or founder story, these are forms of concepts, right? There's going to be a different sort of let me see if I can you guys see my screen? All right, here we go. So here it is. Like us versus them, testimonial, lifestyle video, unique value proposition, press mentions, animations, a UX screen recording, a founder story, just walking down, a city block and asking people to try your product and filming them doing it, obviously getting consent and having them sign a release in the process. These are all entry points for concepts. So type of creative that we are producing. I think this all starts with research. So you can go out into the world. Like, here's another good one that hit me. In an earlier slide in this presentation, I showed these old timey magazine ads, right? These could be concepts. Let's do an old timey magazine ad concept for our next like Instagram story. How do we design into this concept? It's literally your imagination holds the key. So that's how I think about concepts and how we take these bigger swings.
Love it. And then from a prioritization standpoint, because it's just like you can have a lot of ideas like you have in your list. Is there something that like you ever suggest to the team on where they say like, okay, that old timey print, like that's the one we're going to do, and here are the reasons why? Is there some type of framework that you'll use with the team?
So I mean, you obviously have tolerance usually at a
Mm.
brand level for what is on brand or off brand, which I fucking hate those terms for the record. Just because I think that those terms are inherently limiting. I think they're also inherently selfish. Like on brand or off brand, yes, every brand stands for something and that should be valued and have continuity. However, let me give a really good example. We once worked with a brand that sold bedding, right? And they had this kind of like keep you cool at night sort of tagline, all about for people who run hot when they sleep. We, through research, found that a very vibrant community for customers of this product were women with menopause. They were loving this product. We brought this idea as a concept, like let's build a whole concept around this, like let's use this in a, it's kind of a, I don't want to call it a taboo thing, it's not taboo, it's the human body and the human experience of aging, but like it's something that maybe people are like poopery, right? Like everybody poops, they had fun with it, like we can have fun with this. They hated it. They were like, we would never want to do that. They shut it down immediately. It was like so sad because it was such a rich opportunity to explore this sort of like concept. So yeah, overall, like there is going to be those brand tolerance thresholds that need to be overcome. But I think, right, as agents of change, right, going back to the first slide, examining, are we changing? I think it's our duty to be provocateurs, either at the agency level to bring ideas forward or within the framework of your own brand internally in house to be pushing the boundaries of what is possible. And anytime you can ground that in research, like the example I just gave, there is actual conversation on the internet happening about this. Why don't we tap into what's going on? That is always going to help your case. So I think like, your organization's better than anyone. Test the waters, try to push the boundaries for agency folks out there. Our brands pay us for ideas. That's our literal job. So if you're not bringing freshness to the table, I think you're failing in a basic tenet for why you're hired. And so let's just be those agents of change. Let's all try to have some fun and see where the line is, because the line can move.
I'm inspired, man. I'm gonna be an agent of change tomorrow, today, like at the end of this day, like whatever we do, I'm gonna make it come to life in every single part of it.
Yes. Let's
uh,
go.
Alicia has a very, I want to say it's a thought provoking question, but we'll see how it plays out. So shout out to Alicia. Is there such a thing as a creative that lives between a big swing and an iteration? Like we've drawn those lines, but is there something in between? I know, right? I know. I read
Whoa,
it. I'm
we're
like,
getting
damn.
like, should I go eat an edible right now? No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, so I think there is something that lives between these two worlds. So, for example, let's say you take a big swing and test a concept, and that concept pops. There is room to then be playful within the framework of that concept. That is a really valuable way to sort of bridge like iteration with a lot more thoughtfulness and still some capacity for like pushing the envelope forward. So like if you've never done like we'll say like a person on the street type of creative concept, you do the first one, it goes over really well. All right, let's see now how we can play within the framework of that storytelling mode. That's a great way to bring sort of a more thoughtful iterative lens versus just like a change the background or let's do an A/B copy test, right? It's a far more thoughtful iterative framework within the context of a concept.
I didn't realize that would be such like a thought provoking question. It just seemed kind of basic, and I'm like, hold on a second. Whoa, are we redefining what the world is right now? And that's what's happening. So Alicia, really great job on that one. Okay, the question that we're seeing is the most upvoted right now is mainly like the communication side of things. So we're aligned on ideas, but Liam is asking, how do you communicate the need to break the mold and take those creative swings to try out of the box net new creatives rather than only focusing on data driven iteration?
Yeah. So Evan, you and I mean, we've been chopping it up like this for years at this point. And one thing that we often go back to is first and foremost, research is the foundation of everything. You want to watch an exec level person at a company squirm, show them something their competition is doing that you are not. That is a guaranteed way to make somebody squirm. So I think research is really important, right? If you're finding that there is sort of a ceiling or a box, there's a confine. One of the things that I like to do is I like to go out in the wild. I like to go out to the Meta Ads library. I like to go to the TikTok creative resource library. And I like to see what's trending, what's popping, what's happening within the space or the vertical. I just like do a quick Google search of like top whatever companies, right? There's a lot of B2B folks here. So I'll use B2B as an example. Like, let's say like top, like third party logistics software companies. I'll go see what's there and then I'll go try to find examples of their ads in the wild and see where some good risk taking is happening. There's going to be some good example of that out in the wild. I like to then take those and then maybe pair it with non industry or non vertical. So just like what's good creative, period. And what does that landscape look like? And this is good in the subjective sense, right? Because we don't have data in this research context. This is really about like who's doing cool things with visuals, who's got a good storytelling framework. That's really how I'm defining good in this context. And then I like to put a little deck together and I like to go present that deck and say, I've done some competitive analysis and some landscape research. Here are some things that are happening in the wild, both within our space, but are also jump off points for, what is maybe we'll use Gen Z in the language of Gen Z, right? There's a very distinct difference between the creative sort of aesthetic preferences of like Gen Z versus the millennial generation. By zooming in on these like kind of macro level trends and aesthetic analysis, you're able to unlock the language. And by unlocking the language, you can then create pathways for taking these risks within your organization in a very like data led, organized, thoughtful, and persuasive way. I think using that framework to get things greenlit is a very viable and fun framework.
Everyone is getting a firsthand experience of why I said it earlier. Like Darren's someone I respect, and when he talks, I listen. At the end of the day, like this is the good stuff. This is the good stuff. So in that same vein, Darren, like I think people just want to pick your brain and like learn how to think like you do and understand what you do. So I think there's an element of I'm seeing a bunch of different questions along these lines. But Daniel had asked, "What's your favorite podcast or book?" I'm also seeing like newsletters you subscribe to, and just to get caught up to speed on what's
Oh,
going on.
hell yeah. Yeah, so I read a lot. I keep a couple books right next to my desk. The one that I love a lot is Measure What Matters by John Doerr. This goes into the depths of OKRs, so how to structure goals for an organization and scale those goal frameworks out. My team at Wpromote is roughly 100 people, and we work with roughly 130 clients. So we've got to have systems. Like we would literally fall apart and burn and die if we had no systems. So there's got to be process and there's got to be elasticity within that process. So I like to read books that help me organize my thoughts into frameworks. Another book that I cannot recommend highly enough is Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb. He's a renowned sort of statistician and mathematician who parlayed that into stocks. He wrote the book The Black Swan, which basically predicted the 2008 financial collapse. But his whole theory within Anti-Fragile is that systems that thrive in chaos, that are robust, that don't crumble under chaos, are systems that should aim to be replicated. And there's a ton of great frameworks to bring, I think, to creative strategy planning, to systems design, operational design that can be extracted from that book. From a podcast standpoint, I absolutely love listening to Limited Supply with Nick and Moyes. They're just super insightful and candid, and I respect that a ton. And they're very generous with their information, so I also respect that a ton. Shout outs to people who are participating today: Taylor Holiday, Common Thread Collective, an incredible think tank of marketers who are very generous with their information. And so thank you, Taylor, and a great session and debate that they hosted earlier. But yeah, and then from a newsletter standpoint, obviously the big hitters, right? Like Marketing Brew, things like The Hustle. But there's also some really good kind of hidden ones in there. There's one that I love a lot called Marketing BS. It's by Edward Nervamount. He's a renowned CMO who is now more like a consultant, but he writes very contrarian takes on marketing. And I love those because I think it helps widen the frameworks for how to just like think about the business that we're in. So yeah, those are a few. I actually have a reading list that is an email I send to all of our new hires. So when we onboard people onto our team, I just like to give them a hello, welcome to the team, and give them a reading list of things that I find valuable. I'm happy to share that reading list with everybody in
Yeah,
attendance.
most definitely. Most definitely. People are eating it up. That's incredible. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Darren, Everything's so eloquently stated. Thank you so much for joining us. I really,
Yeah, man.
really appreciate it.
You
I
guys know how
really
to crush it. We love motion. Evan, you're a real one. Thank you for having me. It's truly an honor. And thank you, everybody in the chat, everybody in attendance, for wherever you are in the world, for spending time with everyone today. This has been a very awesome and vibrant event. So thank you.